Hi there, my name's Bryony. I'm a psychologist and the head of coaching here at Relish. And thanks for visiting our YouTube channel. We'd love it if you would subscribe and like our videos. So today we're talking about some 12 essential relationship advice tips. So essentially we've compiled some really great advice from our favourite relationship experts, whether that's the Gottmans with their evidence-based practice or Esther Perel with her awesome ideas about intimacy, trust, desire and I guess long-term committed relationships. So enjoy these tips. If you're interested in learning some more, head visit to our website. We've got a lot more in-depth articles around, I guess, some of these concepts and ways of having a healthier relationship. So the first tip is remember that you can control only yourself. So this is a bit of a no-brainer. Obviously, we can't control everyone around us, but we can sometimes forget this in relationships. And it's really good to remember because really, when we do try to control our partners or when we do try to exert more control than we have in a relationship, things can kind of go downhill. So autonomy and independence is really important, but it's also important to respect our partner's independence and their decision-making abilities as well. So power struggles and struggles over control is really normal in a relationship, and it's really good to be able to own that and understand that it's really important to kind of work towards giving up some control and respecting your partner's ability to make a decision, even if you think it's the wrong one. Tip number 2 is sometimes you just need to halt. So HALT stands for hungry, angry, lonely and tired. And it's a really great tip because this kind of speaks to just the simple physiological need that we have, and also the fact that when we are any of those things, our emotional regulation skills kind of go out the window. So you might have had this experience before. We've definitely seen it with children and toddlers, which is when they're hungry or when they haven't slept properly or when they've just had a big argument. They're sort of all over the place emotionally. So if you're noticing that you're kind of feeling a bit agitated or scattered, it's probably not the best time to have a big conversation with your partner. Or if you're feeling that you're getting irritated with your partner, just have a think about it and consider, am I a bit dehydrated? When did I last eat? Did I sleep okay last night? And you might actually find that this big sort of argument that's been building up is simply maybe you're being a bit irritable or your emotional resources are a bit low. So it's just something to consider. The third tip is to understand your dynamic. So this is particularly important in new relationships, but even long-term relationships can kind of have this. And I guess understanding your dynamic is just paying attention to what's unfolding between the two of you. So in relationship therapy, they talk about sort of having 3 clients, each partner, and then also the relationship as a client in itself. And sometimes dynamics can shift. So when children come along, obviously the dynamic between 2 people shifts. Say one person is working and the other one isn't, that's going to impact the dynamic as well. So just paying attention to what's unfolding between the two of you and making a bit of room for things to change. It's totally okay for the dynamic to shift. It does shift across time, and really just being aware of what's going on between the two of you is particularly helpful. And then that allows you to accommodate for any things that change in our behaviour or level of intimacy. The 4th tip is be each other's biggest fan. And this kind of speaks to a lot of the positive psychology research, which indicates that positivity and optimism and gratitude is incredibly helpful when we think about, improving relationships and keeping things positive between a couple. And it sounds really simple, and some people can think that's a little bit toxic positivity, but it's really not so much about that. It's more about choosing to see the positive and choosing to identify good things. So, for example, if you walk past your partner and you sort of let them know that they look really good that day, or you notice that they've done the dishes and you mention that, you're not really kind of exaggerating or being condescending. You're more sort of highlighting the positives and what they have done. Because in relationships, we can fall into that pattern of identifying what hasn't been done and looking at what's lacking or what the deficit is. So being each other's biggest fan just kind of is around making that decision to highlight the good things and support and validate your partner. And you can't really go wrong with that. That's going to be money in the bank for your relationship, essentially. Tip number 5 is create healthy boundaries, and this can be a bit of a challenge, particularly in the beginning stages of a relationship where you sort of want to be in each other's pockets all the time. But it's helpful to have that conversation early on in the relationship around boundaries, because everybody has different boundaries given their background or their upbringing or even their own personal life philosophy. So things like, what's okay to share with friends? So are we going to talk about our sex lives with friends, or is that something that you're not comfortable with me disclosing? Or even things about family, how often are we going to see family? What's going to be the relationship that we have with friends? What are we comfortable doing physically? What do we need when we're arguing? All that sort of thing. So a lot of the time we end up realizing each other's boundaries during arguments or disputes, but it's kind of helpful to just sort of speak through that early on, particularly if you have boundaries which are not necessarily traditional or that you feel might actually come into conflict with your partner. A lot of the time, just exploring them and discussing them calmly means that you'll both be aware and you can likely reach a good compromise. Tip number 6 is practice gratitude. So again, this is kind of the positive psychology aspect, and it's incredible how useful this is, given how straightforward it is. And essentially, this is all around mindset, and it's kind of about choosing to see the good as opposed to what's lacking. So again, when we're stressed, tired, perhaps a bit resentful, we can end up focusing on what's missing. And that can give us that mindset of perhaps resentment and frustration and a deficit sort of mindset. So gratitude is really just about that choice to look at what's going right. So even on a terrible day, you can probably come up with 10 things that you're grateful for or happy about, even if it's something as basic as your pet or coffee or wine or sunshine. So just being able to practice gratitude within the relationship. So one good tip is if you've had an argument with your partner and you're sort of fuming and feeling a bit resentful, just see if you can briefly step into that moment where you reflect on what you're grateful for in the relationship. So see if you can hold space for sort of being annoyed with them and being upset about what they've said, but also considering, well, okay, but what am I grateful for in this relationship? What's kept me here for this long? What's made me choose them as a partner? And this allows us to just kind of have a little bit of cognitive flexibility around how we're feeling, which we know is really, really helpful for relationships. Tip number 7 is broadcast your emotions. And this might be easier for some people than others. Basically, the idea is that we do need to be able to make our partner aware of our emotions. And if you're somebody who's not so emotionally intuitive, if emotions don't come easy to you, or maybe emotions come easily, but you're not actually great at articulating them, this can result in pent-up emotions. People can even become anxious and depressed because they haven't been able to articulate how they feel, and then they don't have their needs met. So finding ways to broadcast your emotions is really helpful. This could be having a set aside time to speak with your partner. It could be having some code words around if you're feeling angry or irritable or sad. Whatever it is, finding ways to express how you're feeling and let your partner know is going to be really helpful. Tip number 8 is speak to your partner in their love language, not yours. So you might be familiar with that idea that we often give people presents that we want, and this kind of speaks to the whole idea of love languages. So if you're familiar with love languages, there's a few of them. There's words of affirmation, physical touch, acts of service, couple of other ones, but essentially the idea is that everybody has their own love language, and it's really important to understand your partner's love language, so you can, if you do want to do something nice for them, you use their love language. So for example, if your partner's love language is acts of service, they might absolutely love it if you cook them a meal, way more than if you gave them a gift or that sort of thing. So they'd love it if you did their washing, love it if you cleaned their car. So they're more about the practical side of things. And even if your love language is maybe physical touch or receiving gifts, understanding that, doing that to them is probably not going to be as great as it is for you. So really understanding what do they need and what do they absolutely appreciate, and then tailoring your behaviour accordingly. So tip number 9 is prioritize each other. And this can be a really tricky one, particularly if you have kids or busy lives or other things going on in your life, particularly like health issues or stress. But essentially we see the happiest relationships, so the best and highest functioning couples, do tend to prioritize each other. And it's not that they neglect the other parts of their life, but more that they make time for each other. So they might have date nights, they might have trips away, they might have little spots of time in the day where they can connect and unwind together. And often having rituals is really helpful in this respect. Tip number 10 is focus on fun. So we know that fun is a big part of relationships early on, and that's often the bit that's kind of responsible for bonding and forming the emotional connection. And this is really important because that's kind of helps to balance out some of the negatives of a relationship, like the routine or conflict or resentment. So as your relationship progresses, we could argue that it's even more important to focus on fun, even if your life is really busy and there's lots of commitments. So this could be doing new experiences with your partner, whether it's taking up a hobby, playing sports, going away on sort of different, being in different locations. It could be just having a games night with your friends. It could be having, going to stand-up comedy, whatever it is to kind of shift that dynamic between the two of you so that you're actually in a space together having fun and enjoying each other's company, as opposed to maybe being at home in that same old dynamic. Tip number 11 is be positive. So I feel like we've kind of covered this already, but again, the idea is to, I guess, view the relationship as a choice. So you're making a choice to be together every day, even if it doesn't always feel like that. And so you might as well kind of make the most of it. And often a positive mindset can be fantastic. I guess when we think about being positive, we don't want to move towards toxic positivity, which is when we just pretend everything's okay and negative feelings are forbidden. Basically, when we talk about being positive, it's about choosing to see what's going right with us. And that probably means making a little bit of room for things that aren't going right and choosing to accept that and make room for it, but also look at what's great about the relationship. So it could be that you talk with each other before bed about the 3 things that you appreciate about each other or the things that went well that day. So even on a terrible day, you can probably find 3 things that went well, even if it's that, yeah, I got a nice sandwich for lunch today, I got to bed on time, and I watched a few episodes of my favourite TV show. So not the best day in the world, but at least there were some good spots in the day. And tip number 12 is trust is everything. And this is something that comes up a lot for us at Relish, is that even in non-monogamous relationships, there's a great deal of trust because pretty much every relationship is kind of built on that foundation of trust. So when trust is breached or when it has been damaged, it's really important to repair it because I guess emotional safety is incredibly important. So being together with somebody entails trusting them and being vulnerable with them. So it could be that in your relationship early on, you haven't yet built that foundation of trust, in which case it's really important to have that sort of communication and boundary setting and sharing of those emotional experiences to form an emotional bond. If your relationship is a bit older and maybe you're a few years down the track and there's been a breach of trust, it's even more important to do that repair. Often repairing trust involves kind of processing what's happened and rediscussing boundaries and figuring out how you can move forward together. And that can sometimes require the help of a relationship coach or a therapist or somebody who can kind of be that in-between mediator. But I'd say, as a relationship tip, this is a really big one because in a relationship, trust can sometimes be broached, and it can be around insecurity, it can be around misunderstanding, but whatever it is, it's really important to fix because a relationship can continue without trust, but it probably won't have much of the good stuff in it that sort of makes the relationship worth having. So I hope this has been helpful. If you're interested in learning more, I definitely recommend downloading Relish. It's a 7-day free trial at the moment, and you can use one-on-one coaching. You can engage with the lessons and the content. We've got a huge library of content around trust, intimacy, communication, conflict, flirting, pretty much everything that you could imagine would come up in a relationship. I'd love to hear your comments, so please feel free to leave them below. If you've got some relationship tips that you think would be really useful for our users, or if you'd like us to include some in a future video, just let me know. Like I said, you can read more on the website or download Relish today for free for 7 days. Thanks for watching and see you next time.